The second part of Mice and Men, second part of chapter 3. Lenny followed his words admiringly and moved his lips a little to keep up. George continued, "You remember Andy Cushman, Lenny? Went to grammar school? The one that his old lady used to make hot cakes for the kids?" Lenny asked. "Yeah, that's the one. You can remember anything if there's anything to eat in it." George looked carefully at his solitaire hand. He put an ace up on his scoring rack and piled a 2, 3, and 4 of diamonds on it. "Andy's in San Quentin right now on account of a tart," said George. So San Quentin is a notorious or infamous jail in Northern California, San Francisco. And remember, a tart is a girl that sleeps around a lot, a flirt, like Sunny and Catcher in the Rye. Lenny drummed on the table with his fingers. "George? Huh. George, how long's it gonna be till we get a little place and live on the fat of the land and rabbits?" "I don't know," said George. "We got to get a big steak together. I know a little place we can get cheap, but they ain't giving it away." Old Candy turned slowly over. His eyes were wide open. He watched George carefully. Lenny said, "Tell about that place, George." "I just told you, just last night." "Go on, tell again, George." "Well, it's 10 acres, said George. "Got a little windmill, got a little shack on it, and a chicken run. Got a kitchen, orchard, cherries, apples, peaches, cots, nuts, got a few berries. There's a place for alfalfa and plenty water to flood it. There's a pig pen and rabbits, George." "No place for rabbits now, but I could easy build a few hutches and you could feed alfalfa to the rabbits." "Damn right I could," said Lenny. "You goddamn right I could." George's hands were stopped working with the cards. His voice was growing warmer. "And we could have a few pigs. I could build a smokehouse like the one Grandpa had. And when we kill a pig, we can smoke the bacon and the hams and make sausage and all like that. And when the salmon run up the river, we could catch 100 of them, salt them down, or smoke them. We could have them for breakfast. They ain't nothing so nice as smoked salmon. When the fruit come in, we could can it. And tomatoes, they're easy to can. Every Sunday, we'd kill a chicken or a rabbit. Maybe we'd have a cow or a goat, and the cream is so goddamn thick, you gotta cut it with a knife and take it out with a spoon." Lenny watched him with wide eyes, and Old Candy watched him too. Lenny said softly, "We could live off of the fat of the land." "Sure," said George. "All kinds of vegetables in the garden. And if we want a little whiskey, we can sell a few eggs or something, or some milk. We just live there. We'd belong there. There wouldn't be no more running around the country and getting fed by a Jap cook." Japanese, that's a slur. "No, sir. We'd have our own place where we belonged and not sleep in no bunkhouse." This reminds me of when people ask me, "What do I do for a living?" I say teacher. And then they always look at me like this. "Oh, God, sorry." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And then they say, "Well, what do you teach?" if they really care. And I'll say honors English, honors history. A lot of times, if I know the person's being sarcastic, I'll be sarcastic back to them, especially if they give me a big sneer at first when I say teacher. You know, it's like the T word, ooh, teacher. And I say, "Well, what do you teach?" I'll say hope. Because really, isn't that what I teach? What is George teaching right now? He's teaching Lenny hope. And isn't that what life's all about? If you know there's no hope, or like if a kid has 10% in their middle school class and the grades are due tomorrow, do you think that kid has any hope? But what if that kid has 56%? They have hope. They have a prayer that they could get to 60. 10%, no hope. So that's why I like to say, sometimes I say I teach kids, but usually I'll say I teach hope, just like George is teaching hope right now. And I didn't mark my place. "Tell about the house, George," Lenny begged. Sure, we'd have a little house and a room to ourselves, little fat iron stove, and in the winter we'd keep a fire going in it. It ain't enough land, so we'd have to work too hard. Maybe 6, 7 hours a day. We wouldn't have to buck no barley 11 hours a day. And when we put in a crop, why, we'd be there to take the crop up. We'd know what come of our planting. And rabbits, Lenny said eagerly, and I'd take care of them. Tell how I'd do that, George. Sure, you'd go out in the alfalfa patch and you'd have a sack. You'd fill up the sack and bring it in and put it in the rabbit cages. They'd nibble and they'd nibble, said Lenny. The way they do, I seen 'em. Every 6 weeks or so, George continued, them would throw a litter, so we'd have plenty of rabbits to eat and to sell, and we'd keep a few pigeons to go flying around the windmill like they done when I was a kid. He looked raptly at the wall over Lenny's head. And it'd be our own, and nobody could can us. If we don't like a guy, we can say, get the hell out, and by God, he's got to do it. And if a friend come along, why, we'd have an extra bunk, and we'd say, why don't you spend the night? And by God, he would. We'd have a setter dog and a couple striped cats, but you got to watch out them cats don't get the little rabbits. Lenny breathed hard. You just let them try to get the rabbits. I'll break their goddamn necks. I'll smash them with a stick. He subsided, grumbling to himself, threatening the future cats, which might dare to disturb the future rabbits. Hope. Future cats, future rabbits. Lenny has to have hope. All of us do, don't we? Is it a human condition? We have to have hope. George sat entranced with his own picture. When Candy spoke, they both jumped, as though they had been caught doing something reprehensible. Candy said, you know where there's a place like that? George was on guard immediately. S'pose I do, he said. What's that to you? You don't need to tell me where it's at. It might be any place. Sure, said George. That's right. You couldn't find it in 100 years. Candy went on excitedly. How much they want for a place like that? George watched him suspiciously. Well, I could get it for $600. The old people that owns it is flat bust, and the old lady needs an operation. Say, what's it to you? You got nothing to do with us. Candy said, I ain't much good with only one hand. I lost my hand right here in this ranch. That's why they give me a job swamping, and they give me $250 because I lost my hand. And I got 50 more saved up right in the bank right now. That's 300. And I get 50 more coming the end of the month. Tell you what, he leaned forward eagerly. Suppose I went in with you guys. That's $350 I'd put in. I ain't much good, but I could cook and tend the chickens and hoe the garden some. How'd that be? George half closed his eyes. I gotta think about that. We was always gonna do it by ourselves. Candy interrupted him. I'd make a will and leave my share to you guys in case I kick off, 'cause I ain't got no relatives nor nothing. You guys got any money? Maybe we could do it right now. George spat on the floor disgustedly. We got $10 between us. Then he said thoughtfully, look, if me and Lenny work a month and don't spend nothing, we'll have $100. That'd be $450. I bet we could swing her for that. Then you and Lenny could go get her started, and I'd get a job and make up the rest. And you could sell eggs and stuff like that. They fell into silence. They looked at one another, amazed. This thing they had never really believed in was coming true. George said reverently, Jesus Christ, I bet we could swing her. His eyes were full of wonder. I bet we could swing her, he repeated softly. Candy sat on the edge of the bunk. He scratched the stump of his wrist nervously. I got hurt 4 years ago, he said. They'll can me pretty soon. Just as soon as I can't swamp out no bunkhouses, they'll put me on the county. County, like the poorhouse, or like the state takes over, like a foster situation. Maybe if I give you guys my money, you'll let me hoe in the garden even after I ain't no good at it. And I'll wash dishes and little chicken stuff like that. But I'll be on our own place, and I'll be let to work on our own place, he said miserably. You seen what they done to my dog tonight. They says he wasn't no good to himself nor nobody else. When they can me here, I wish somebody'd shoot me, but they won't do nothing like that. I won't have no place to go, and I can't get no more jobs. I'll have $30 more coming, time you guys is ready to quit. George stood up. We'll do her, he said. We'll fix up that little old place, and we'll go live there. He sat down again. They all sat still, all bemused by the beauty of the thing. Each mind was popped into the future when this lovely thing should come about. George said wonderingly, Suppose they was a carnival or a circus come to town, or a ball game, or any damn thing. Old Candy nodded in appreciation of the idea. We'd just go to her, George said. We wouldn't ask nobody if we could. Just say, we'll go to her, and we would. Just milk the cow and sling some grain to the chickens and go to her. The freedom to just go to something and not have to get permission from a boss. Wow. Be amazing. And put some grass to the rabbits, Lenny broke in. I would never forget to feed them when we gonna do it, George. In 1 month. Right squack in 1 month. Know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna write to them old people that owns the place that will take it. And Candy'll send $100 to bind her. Sure will, said Candy. They got a good stove there? Sure, got a nice stove. Burns coal or wood. I'm gonna take my pup, said Lenny. I bet by Christ he likes it there. By Jesus. Voices were approaching from outside. George said quickly, Don't tell anybody about this. Just us three and nobody else. They're liable to can us so we can't make no stake. Just go on like we were gonna buck barley the rest of our lives. Then all of a sudden, someday we'll go get our pay and scram out of here. Lenny and Candy nodded, and they were grinning with delight. Don't tell nobody, Lenny said to himself. Candy said, George, I ought to have shot that dog myself, George. I shouldn't have ought to have let no stranger shoot my dog. Oh. Yikes. I was kind of thinking that too, but didn't really want to say it. The door opened. Slim came in, followed by Curly and Carlson and Whit. Slim's hands were black with tar, and he was scowling. Curly hung close to his elbow. Remember, they theorized that Curly thinks that Slim is making Kool-Aid with the wife. Curly said, Well, I didn't mean nothing by it. Well, I didn't mean nothing, Slim. I just asked you. Slim said, Well, you've been asking me too often. I'm getting goddamn sick of it. If you can't look after your own goddamn wife, what do you expect me to do about it? You lay off of me. I'm just trying to tell you I didn't mean nothing, said Curly. I just thought you might have saw her. Why don't you tell her to stay the hell home where she belongs, said Carlson. You let her hang around bunkhouses and pretty soon you're going to have some been on your hands and you won't be able to do nothing about it. Curly whirled on Carlson. You keep out of this, lest you want to step outside. Carlson laughed. You goddamn punk. You tried to throw a scare into Slim and you couldn't make it stick. Slim throwed a scare into you. You're yellow as a frog belly. I don't care if you're the best welter in the country. You come for me and I'll kick your goddamn head off. Yellow, coward, yellow. Candy joined the attack with joy. Glove full of Vaseline, he said disgustedly. Curly glared at him. His eyes slipped on past and lighted on Lenny. And Lenny was still smiling with delight at the memory of the ranch. Curly stepped over to Lenny like a terrier. What the hell are you laughing at? Lenny looked blankly at him. Huh? Then Curly's rage exploded. Come on, you big bastard. Get up on your feet. No big son of a bitch is going to laugh at me. I'll show you who's yellow. Lenny looked helplessly at George, and then he got up and tried to retreat. Curly was balanced and poised. He slashed at Lenny with his left and then smashed down his nose with a right. Lenny gave a cry of terror. Blood welled from his nose. George, he cried. Make him let me alone, George. He backed until he was against the wall, and Curly followed, slugging him in the face. Lenny's hands remained at his sides. He was too frightened to defend himself. George was on his feet, yelling, Get him, Lenny! Don't let him do it! Lenny covered his face with huge paws and bleated with terror. He cried, Make him stop, George! Then Curly attacked his stomach and cut off his wind. Slim jumped up. That dirty little rat, he cried. I'll get him myself. George put out his hand and grabbed Slim. Wait a minute, he shouted. He cupped his hand around his mouth and yelled, Get him, Lenny! Lenny took his hands away from his face and looked about for George, and Curly slashed at his eyes. The big face was covered with blood. George yelled again, I said get him! Curly's fist was swinging when Lenny reached for it. The next minute, Curly was flopping like a fish on a line, and his closed fist was lost in Lenny's big hand. George ran down the room. Let go of him! Lenny, let go! But Lenny watched in terror the flopping little man whom he held. Blood ran down Lemmy's face. One of his eyes was cut and closed. George slapped him in the face again and again, and still Lenny held on to the closed fist. Curly was white and shrunken by now, and his struggling had become weak. He stood, crying, his fist lost in Lenny's paw. George shouted over and over, Let go his hand! Lenny, let go! Slim, come help me while the guy's got any hand left! Suddenly, Lenny got let go of his hold. He crouched, cowering against the wall. You told me to, George, he said miserably. Curly sat down on the floor, looking in wonder at his crushed hand. Slim and Carlson bent over him. Then Slim straightened up and regarded Lenny with horror. We gotta get him to a doctor, he said. Looks to me like every bone in his hand is bust. I didn't wanna, Lenny cried. I didn't wanna hurt him. Slim said, Carlson, you get the candy wagon hitched up. We'll take him into Soledad and get him fixed up. Carlson hurried out. Slim turned to the whimpering Lenny. It ain't your fault, he said. This punk sure had it coming to him. But Jesus, he ain't hardly got no hand left. Slim hurried out, and in a moment returned with a tin cup of water. He held it to Curly's lips. George said, Slim, will we get canned now? We need the steak. Will Curly's old man can us now? Slim smiled wryly. He knelt down beside Curly. You got your senses in hand enough to listen? He asked. Curly nodded. Well, then listen, Slim went on. I think you got your hand caught in a machine. If you don't tell nobody what happened, we ain't going to. But you just tell and try to get this guy canned, and we'll tell everybody. And then will you get the laugh? So they're bribing him with the embarrassment of getting beat up. So that's the kind of ego this guy has, is that, oh my gosh, you would tell that I didn't win a fight? Oh man, I'll lie then. Like, lying is better than having people think you got beat in a fight, which really kind of was probably kind of an even fight. But Lenny definitely finished it. I won't tell, said Curly. He avoided looking at Lenny. Buggy wheels sounded outside. Slim helped Curly up. Come on now. Carlson's going to take you to the doctor. He helped Curly out the door. The sound of wheels drew away. In a moment... I'm going to just finish it. In a moment, Slim came back into the bunkhouse. He looked at Lenny, still crouched fearfully against the wall. Let's see your hands, he asked. Lenny stuck out his hands. Christ almighty, I hate to have you mad at me, Slim said. George broke in. Lenny was just scared, he explained. He didn't know what to do. I told you nobody ought never to fight him. No, I guess it was Candy I told. Candy nodded solemnly. That's just what you done. Right this morning when Curly first slid into your friend, you says, he better not fool with Lenny if he knows what's good for him. That's just what you says to me. George turned to Lenny. It ain't your fault, he said. You don't need to be scared no more. You done just what I told you to. Maybe you better go in the washroom and clean up your face. You look like hell, Lenny smiled with his bruised mouth. I didn't want no trouble, he said. He walked toward the door, but just before he came to it, he turned back. George, what do you want? I can still tend the rabbits, George. Sure, you ain't done nothing wrong. I didn't mean no harm, George. Well, get the hell out and wash your face.